All right, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Powered by Iron Health. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about return to sport testing for young athletes who have had an injury and who are looking to return back to their sport. Like, when is the appropriate time? How do you know it's the appropriate time? What to look for, and what your PT, if you're in PT right now, should be doing to test. Biggest reason, if you've been listening to me for a while or this podcast, the biggest reason why I became a PT was because when I was young, I actually tore my ACL in my knee. And I played football in high school. And after the season, I was just running around with my friends playing two and touch. And I happened to just put my foot in one spot and pivot. And I heard a pop. And I knew, I was like, oh man, there we go. I'm done. My career is done. I'm not playing football anymore. I'm not going to be able to get back to doing what I love to do. My knee is blasted. So went and got surgery. Remember my surgeon just being very cognizant of the scar and making sure the graft was good. And then I remember my first day in PT, and really, again, this is the biggest story of why I became a PT. They literally were there to coach me through walking with crutches, the fear of having this injury. And they were telling me from the start, you're going to be able to return back to running and playing and doing whatever you want to do. So right there, I knew I wanted to be a PT. And I'm speaking about this topic from experience, right? I was in PT for a long time. And if anyone knows what an ACL tear is, it's a big ligament in your knee. When you tear it, the rehab process can be very long, right? Your muscle in your leg doesn't really come back appropriately or quickly. You need to work on that. And then you need to build endurance and strength and stability. And it takes a long time to get back to a high level playing football or playing soccer or anything like that. And I remember my PT saying, we're going to get you to this level. We're going to test you to make sure that one, the fear is gone. Two, you actually have the strength and the stability. And three, you're not going to get injured again. So these were all the aspects of that. Now, obviously I'm a PT now, so it goes in a lot more depth, and we'll talk about those components today, right? So if you have an injury, we're going to start with a lower body injury because it's the most prevalent, like an ACL tear or a knee injury in younger athletes. If you or someone you know, or your daughter or son or nephew has an injury, it's important to be there for them and understand what their process is going to be, what it's going to look like for them to get back to sport. I know, especially if we're talking kids specifically, younger kids, sometimes sports can be their whole world. So the first layer, you have to know that with any return to sport, there is a psychological aspect of it. And I bring that up first because I really think that's the bottom of the pyramid, right? There's a lot tied to your identity in sports. There's a lot tied to your identity of like, oh, I can do this, or I am this type of player, especially in kids, right? There's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of stress on it. And now even in college too, and pro leagues too, right? Imagine that layer where they have this identity attached to them. If they had an injury, it's like, how am I going to bounce back from that injury? So we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of return to sport first, and we'll kind of circle back around it because it's very important. But in the psychology, the first level is you should be with a therapist who understands your sport, is or was an athlete, a pretty competitive athlete, and understands how to talk to athletes, right? Because the first thing you don't want is someone you're going to come in and say, oh man, I tore my ACL in my knee. You don't want that person who's going to be like, oh, you're done, or you're never going to play sports again. Or my favorite is when someone has an injury, like you're never going to run again. Like that happens. And that is true. It really does happen out there. So if you have someone like that who's treating you from the start of your injury, immediately move on. You need someone who's going to be able to support you. The first layer is that whatever injury you have, you can bounce back from, and you can return to sport, and you could return at a high level. I mean, we'll talk about like Adrian Peterson, if anyone knows who that is. He's an NFL player. He tore his ACL in his knee. He was back in a year competing at the highest level possible. So yes, he's an extreme level athlete, but anyone can get back to that point of competing. The first layer is your support system and your psyche. Who's around you? Who's talking to you? How is your family talking to you? How is your therapist talking to you? How's your medical doctor talking to you? Having that communication with a group that's going to make sure that you're going to get back to where you're going is crucial. And throughout the process, the psychology component just gets deeper and deeper. What do I mean by that? When you first start, we're going to say the ACL. When you first start with an ACL tear, you're walking on crutches, you're limping, you have pain, your knee doesn't bend, and you have all the stress of saying like, wow, like, am I ever going to get beyond that? That first layer of rehab has to be very much psychological, where someone's coaching you through the process, telling you it's normal. So you can cope with that, right? And that doesn't last forever. Then the next phase is like, okay, now I got to regain stability. It requires a different level of mental input from someone external. You need to make sure who you're talking to and your therapist actually collaborates with the parents or the partners or whoever is in that person's circle, because it has to be a combined effort. So really, return to sport starts with your psyche. How much trust can you regain in the ability to play? Because you can get there, especially with a knee or an upper body. Like, there's no reason why you can't. There's baseball players like who have Tommy John surgery who are back to throwing. There's football players, like I said, who have ACL tears who are back to playing at the highest level. So understanding you can get to that level is very crucial. So that's the base level of return to sport. Work on your psychology. Be very cognizant of how you're talking to yourself in the moment when you have an injury and post-surgery if you have surgery, and try to replace it with positivity things and understand that where you are today is not where you're going to be tomorrow. It's a process and you'll get there. So have a good psychology foundation and find a support crew who's going to help and align you to be a better version when you do get back to sports, because you can. So that's the base layer, right? We talk psychology. The second layer is the actual functionality of things. Like, how are you functioning? How's your body moving? Are you appropriately firing the right muscles? Are you creating stability? Is your body able to course correct? And this is where you're kind of evolving past the base level of crutches to now getting muscles firing, or even if it's a shoulder, you're in a sling, now you're getting the right muscles firing. You start to introduce some strength training, some stability work to get the right muscles going. During this phase, you want to make sure that, one, you're not working it too fast, because a lot of times, and we see it a lot in the PT world, where people jump the gun way too fast, where they're like, oh, I'm doing this today. That means I can go and do this. I can go run, I can jump. You have to take your time in this process, because your body is very smart. It's going to learn to compensate and use muscles that aren't the muscles you should be using. So you have to focus on what you need to use. And you do that with slow duration exercise, slowly increasing the strength. So that's that strength phase, that functional phase after your psychology aspect is worked on. And one doesn't end. This is kind of like what I would classify as the pyramid structure, but they don't end. They go hand in hand, right? So you have your psychology, your function. And that last part is really when you're getting back to that return to sport level, is your agility, your dynamics, everything that's explosive. Like, if you've had a surgery, wherever it is, to regain that explosiveness, one, takes a lot on your mind. Again, back to that psychology. You need to understand that your body can do it again. And two, it requires a lot of muscles firing in unison. And if you've had an injury, your body now is starting to move in different ways. So we have to test it. And we have to press it on different ways. We're doing all these different modalities now to make sure your body can react, or you can react in the moment, because when you're out on the field or when you're playing a sport, it's reaction. It's not like you're not prepping for everything. So we need to test that. We need to test that reaction and that agility. Those are the base levels of the pyramid. Those are things you're working on. Now, when you actually are getting ready, when you're like, hey, I want to return back to soccer, and let's use soccer as an example, because that's the most common injury we see is ACL tears in young soccer players. So we're going to use that as an example. You have someone who is almost prepped and ready to return to sport. You actually should be getting ran through a test from your therapist, right? There's a lot of studies out there that show specific markers that someone should be hitting if they're going to be returning to that high level of athleticism. If you're not getting run through a test, like, what is your check marks? How are you checking and balancing what you're doing? You're not. There has to be a specific level of test. Now, one caveat to that test is if you're not ready psychologically, you'll never be ready. So that's why I say that's the foundation of your rehab. You need to always be working on your mind, your mindset as an athlete. If you have an injury, you want to return to sport, your mindset is everything. Start there, build upon it, and then Slowly put the pieces in. If we're going to use the knee as an example, you should be able to jump on one leg. You should have distance equal to each other, left to right. You should be able to have almost equal strength left to right in the quads. And there's certain ways you can test that. And then you got to test the boundaries. Like, hey, can I react in the moment to things that are happening versus saying, I know where I'm going. Like, let's say if you're like, I'm going to run left versus saying, oh, the ball's over there, I have to pivot. Can you handle that? In my experience, like I said before, a lot of people return to sport too quickly. Why risk the opportunity to re-injure it and return too fast? Make sure that what you're doing is bringing you back to the level that you need to be to succeed. Don't start back at ground level. Don't jump the gun. The sport's going to be there. Work on your mindset consistently. Work on your strength, your function, and your psychology. If you have that all aligned, you will return. You'll return back stronger than ever before. If you're in the process of potentially looking to return back to a sport, ask your therapist to test you. Get a test. Sometimes even surgeons don't see the test as much as we do. So ask your trusted therapist to say, hey, test me. I want to get back. Am I ready? And go based on their judgment. Don't just say, I feel ready. I'm going to go. Go based on their judgment. Be smart with it, and you'll get back to doing what you love to do. Thanks for watching.